Did we really land on the moon? Or was it the greatest hoax ever filmed on a soundstage? Welcome back to Conspiracy Decoded. Today, we're tackling the granddaddy of all modern conspiracy theories, the Moon Landing Hoax. For over half a century, a passionate minority has argued that the 6 Apollo moon landings between 1969 and 1972 were an elaborate hoax staged by NASA with help from Stanley Kubrick himself. The claim is stunning. The US government, desperate to win the space race against the Soviet Union, faked the whole thing. But here's what makes this theory so fascinating: some of the evidence they cite actually sounds convincing at first. That is, until you look at the science. So grab your tinfoil hat and your physics textbook. We're going to explore both sides of the moon landing debate and find out once and for all what really happened. Let's start with the most famous pieces of evidence hoax believers point to. First up, the American flag. In Apollo 11 footage, the flag appears to ripple and wave. But there's no wind on the moon, right? How could a flag flutter in a vacuum? Hoax believers say this proves the footage was shot on Earth where wind exists. Second, the shadows. In Apollo photos, shadows appear to go in different directions. If there's only one light source, the sun, shouldn't all shadows be parallel? And yet, we see shadows that diverge. Third, the lack of stars. In every single moon photo, the sky is pitch black with 0 stars visible. Astronauts said they could see stars with their own eyes, so why don't the cameras show them? The hoax theory says NASA deliberately left out stars because they couldn't accurately replicate the star field. On the surface, these 3 arguments seem compelling. They're visual, they're intuitive, and they've been repeated for decades. But every single one has a straightforward scientific explanation that the hoax theory conveniently ignores. Let's address each claim, starting with the flag. The Apollo flag wasn't a normal flag, it was specially designed with a horizontal metal rod across the top to keep it extended. The waving motion you see is simply the astronaut twisting the pole to plant it in the lunar soil. The aluminum rod vibrates, and in the moon's low gravity with no atmosphere, that vibration takes much longer to dampen out than on Earth. That's why it keeps swaying, not because of wind. What about the shadows? Perspective matters. On a hilly, uneven surface like the lunar landscape, shadows naturally appear to diverge when photographed from certain angles, especially with a wide-angle lens. It's a well-known optical effect called perspective convergence. Try it yourself in a parking lot with a single streetlight. The shadows from different objects will not look perfectly parallel in a photo. And the lack of stars? This is actually the easiest to explain. The lunar surface is extremely bright in direct sunlight reflectivity similar to asphalt. To properly expose the astronauts and the lunar module, cameras had to use fast shutter speeds and small apertures. Stars are dim point sources of light, they simply don't show up at those exposure settings. Try photographing stars from a brightly lit city at night with any normal camera. You'll get exactly the same result. This is basic photography 101, not a conspiracy. Now let's talk about the sheer scale of what the hoax would require. The hoax theory claims NASA faked 6 landings over 3.5 years, involving 24 Apollo astronauts who walked on or orbited the moon. Every single one of those astronauts would have to be in on the lie. Not a single whistleblower in 50 years. Think about that. The US government supposedly ran the most expensive deception in history, and nobody has ever produced a deathbed confession, a leaked document, or a credible insider account. Meanwhile, actual government conspiracies like MKUltra and the Tuskegee syphilis experiment were exposed within decades by whistleblowers and declassified documents. The Soviets, who had every motivation to expose a U.S. hoax and the technical capability to detect a fake, never once accused America of fraud. They tracked every Apollo mission with their own radar and telescopes. Soviet cosmonaut Alexei Leonov said, "How can you fake something that other countries can monitor?" And here's the killer: retroreflectors placed on the lunar surface by Apollo astronauts are still used today by scientists worldwide to bounce laser beams off the moon and measure its distance with millimeter precision. Multiple independent observatories have confirmed these measurements. You cannot fake a laser-ranging target from Earth. Let's be fair, the moon landing hoax theory persists for legitimate reasons. The space race was intensely political. President Kennedy set the goal in 1961, and by 1969, America desperately needed a win after Vietnam and civil rights turmoil. The historical record shows NASA did fake some training footage underwater simulations that were released as lunar surface training. And yes, Stanley Kubrick's 2001, A Space Odyssey came out in 1968 with groundbreaking special effects. The timing is suspicious. But here's what hoax believers miss: faking something on film for a movie audience and faking it for the entire world's scientific community are completely different problems. Kubrick's own daughter, Katerina, has publicly stated her father never filmed moon landing footage. The film stock used for Apollo footage was heat-tested and shown to withstand the moon's extreme temperatures. If it was filmed on Earth, the heat damage patterns would be wrong. And the Van Allen radiation belts, which hoax believers claim would have killed the astronauts, were actually crossed quickly in about an hour each way with spacecraft shielding that reduced radiation exposure to less than a chest X-ray. The Apollo astronauts carried film badges that confirmed their actual radiation doses, consistent with the calculated predictions. So where does this leave us? The moon landing hoax theory is a fascinating case study in how skepticism can go wrong. Healthy skepticism questions authority and demands evidence, which is exactly what the scientific community has provided for every Apollo claim. But unhealthy skepticism rejects evidence that contradicts a preferred narrative. The moon landings happened. We have the rock samples distributed to labs worldwide, the laser retroreflectors, the Soviet confirmation, the tracking data from multiple countries, and the testimony of everyone involved. Subscribe and hit the bell to join us next time when we explore another conspiracy theory, because the truth is out there, even if it landed at Tranquility Base in 1969. Thanks for watching, and keep asking questions, just make sure you're listening to the answers.